So this is episode 33. I'm delighted to be talking to Ian McMillan. I'm very nervous about this because this is episode 33. This is the 33rd time I've interviewed somebody. I imagine you've interviewed people hundreds, perhaps more than that, thousands.
Yeah, lots of times, but every time you never know what's going to happen. So that you're always on number 33 as far as that goes. You know what I mean? You never know what they're going to say. You never know if they're going to say the thing that you thought they might say. They might say something, as you know, when you're doing these things, they might say something absolutely extraordinary, or they might say something that you get the sense they've said it before. So yeah, every time you do an interview, you have no idea what's going to happen, which is part of the fun, I've got to say. I enjoy interviewing people. I enjoy being interviewed. On the radio, on the Verb, it's kind of easy because my producer is talking to me down the headphones all the time. So that helps. You know, she'll say things like, you don't need to ask that question because they've already answered it, or could you just mind asking something else? Or so, and that helps, you know. But yeah, I love interviewing people, and I love being interviewed. It's great. So this is marvelous. It's like going to a spa is what this is. You know, not the supermarket, but it's like having a bath and whatever else happens at a spa. I've never been to one, but I imagine it's like this.
Yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it. I'm finding that it's getting easier each time. The very first few, I was extremely tense.
I think the thing is that I think the only time it doesn't work is if it's obvious to the interviewee that you're working down a list of questions, and that you can have a list of questions. I always have a list of questions, but sometimes the interviewee will say something that might let you think of some kind of digression or tangent that will then bring you back. And just the more of it you do, the more confident you get with not being a slave to the list. It's like when you do a poetry reading, you have your list, but then you know you'll go off the list. So that's the only time. You know, and I think if you've only done 33, then you're bound to feel tense. You know, that just the more of it you do, the better you get at it. I promise you, it gets easier. It really does.
It does. And what you said is true, that I started with a list of questions. The first few episodes I did a list of about 20 questions. Now I just have about 6.
Yeah.
Just to remind me of things that are worth mentioning and worth bringing up.
Because the trouble is, sometimes you can, if you have a list, I've done it myself, you end up doggedly sticking to the list. I think, right, I know we've been with for 4 hours, but we've only done 14 questions. Or you do the opposite and you get every answer in number 1. That's the hardest one. You'll have found that when they answer every possible thing. Their first answer lasts 45 minutes and you can't get a word in. That's no fun.
I know what you mean. Well, on that note, we do have to have a first question. And I have a standard first question. And it's, how did you get into poetry? What was your main inspiration? Why poetry, of all the things you can do?
I always ask people that myself, you know, because it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Any writer, why poetry? For me, it comes from, I think it comes from before you're born, to be frank. So for me, it was my great aunt, Bella Howatson, who was a Scottish rhyming border balladeer. She was my dad's auntie. My dad was from the Scottish borders. And she wrote poems. And her poems were published in these border ballads books. They weren't great poems, but they were poems. And she was revered in the family. Here's the poet. You know, I never met her. There's the poet. She used to write me dad these rhyming letters, which he kept. And you think, gosh, if poetry comes to you through your DNA, then that's where it came from. The second reason I'm a poet is because of the place I'm from, Darfield, near Barnsley, which when I was born here was part of the West Riding. And the West Riding, which I often talk about, was a fantastic education authority run by this fellow called Sir Alec Clegg, who was an absolute godlike genius, who said, simply, all children are creative. So in our school lessons, we'd sing, we'd dance, we'd paint, we'd draw, we would write poems. And we wrote poems all the time. So at the end of every lesson, you'd write a poem or a story, but mainly poems. And so it just felt like poetry was the most natural thing to do. And then as a teenager, I wrote poems. And I quite liked, as I still do, standing up in public and performing. So that's why I kind of chose poetry, because I like standing up in public and doing them. And in the early 70s, when I started doing that, it was folk clubs. You go around folk clubs. Me and my mate Martin would go around folk clubs. And they were great. They were very accepting. So you go into the folk club and they'd have a singer's night, equivalent of an open mic. And there'd be somebody singing ballads. There'd be somebody singing Bob Dylan songs. There'd be somebody singing their own songs. And there'd be somebody like me and Martin reading your own poems out. And it just felt like, what a liberation to stand there reading poems. What a great thing that was. And this is the either went down well or badly, you know. And in the end, what it taught you was to stand up in public and perform. So that's why poetry, really, you know, it always just felt like a natural thing to do. You know, I just felt like I'm going to be a poet. And then I had kind of mentors. A fantastic poet who's not with us anymore called Pete Morgan. I went on an Arvin course when I was about 17. And Pete Morgan and Alan Brownjohn were the tutors. And Pete, he was a freelance poet. He made his living as a poet. He went into schools. He did workshops. He wrote things for magazines. He looked like a poet. He was kind of tall and handsome. And he had a big chest and he would perform these poems. And I thought, yeah, I want to be Pete Morgan, if that's all right with you. I'd like to be Pete Morgan. And if you thought, because of his example, you thought, well, actually, you can make a living at this. And that's what I've always been privileged and excited to do, to make a living at it. What it means is you have to do lots of things. You know, you can't, some people are great poets, but they're not very good at running workshops, which is fine, you know, and they shouldn't try it. Whereas I like running workshops, I like doing readings. You end up being asked to write poems about things you'd never think of writing them about. So that's why poetry, really, it just felt like the only career I could ever have. And by great good luck and all that kind of thing, it turns out that it's been that. Well, there's a result, Anthony, definitely. I can't believe me. Look, honestly, I can't. People say, yeah, but you work hard. Well, I don't work that hard. You know, people outside in the street shoveling, people working at ASOS down the thing, you know, packing stuff, they're working hard. I'm just having a good time. Honestly, I really am. So poetry, definitely.
Yeah, you need to build a lot around being a poet in order to make a living from it. Well, there are certain poets who could just rely on book sales, but
yes, not many though.
Not many.
I think you have to do, like when I first went freelance, which was in 1983, so a long time ago. But the parallel with now is that you got an uncaring Tory government in charge, you know. So there's that, and so you think that there won't be many things to do, but in fact, you know, I used to do writing workshops for the WEA, poetry workshops, the Workers' Educational Association, all over South Yorkshire. Getting on the bus and going to these places and doing writing workshops. And with the arrogance of youth, I always used to say to these people who come to these workshops, whatever you do, don't make your poems rhyme. If you rhyme them, I'm going to send them back and you're going to have to write them unrhymed. So I did stuff like that. I did poetry readings. So Rotherham Arts Centre, God bless it, would have these lunchtime cabarets and they pay you £6 for doing lunchtime cabaret. And you get a letter thinking it was your £6, and it would be a letter saying, would you accept £6? You had to write back saying, yes, I will accept £6. They'd send another letter back saying, here is your contract for £6. You'd sign the contract, you'd post it back. Eventually you get a check for £6. But it just meant that kind of thing built up. But then I was writing reviews for the NME. That was so much fun. You go and see a band and you'd write a review. And I was always keen to go and see bands that nobody had heard of. You know, so you could see bands in community centres and pubs and things. And then send these reviews off and type them out and take them to Barnsley Station, where they'd be taken in a train, Red Star parcel as was, picked up at St Pancras Station by a chap on a bike, who'll then take them to Enemy and they print them out. And I used to get £13.50 for these reviews, but it used to cost me £6 to send them. But that kind of thing, you know, so you're always kind of doing lots of different things. And that's all my advice to people when they're going freelance is always say yes, because it leads to adventures. And if it's no good, they won't ask you again. And even these days, you know, when we have got this another uncaring Tory government, there's plenty of opportunities about, thanks to things like the lottery. I'm now gone full circle, weirdly, and I'm now doing a lot of community arts work. I'm not doing as much touring, partly because you couldn't because of the pandemic, but I'm not doing so much touring. I'm doing loads of community artwork in Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham, Sheffield, just like I did 30 odd years ago, and there is work out there. So you always have to have a framework of things around you, unless you don't want to. And I'm not saying that everybody should. Some people are very happy to sit and write poems and maybe have another job, have a proper job, have an academic job. That's fine. You know, but if you want to be a freelance, then you've got to accept that sometimes you'll be asked to do ridiculous things, and you end up doing them. And it just leads to joy and happiness, or disaster and humiliation. I can laugh about it now. Sometimes you couldn't when you're younger. I once wrote a play for a theatre company for actors with learning disabilities. And they said, "Can you write this play?" I said, "Yes." They said, "The reason we're asking you to write the play is that you are a good improviser." And what they often do, these people with learning disabilities, they'll go off script and just start messing about. And they know that you could do that, and I could improvise as well and bring us back to the plot. I said, "Yeah, I can definitely do that." But then suddenly I kind of turned away and looked back, and it turned out this play was actually, this fella had rewritten it for me. It was a scripted play, and I was acting in it. I said, "Look, I am not an actor. I can stand up in front of anybody and speak, but I am not an actor. I can't remember lines. I don't know where to stand. I've not done any of that." They said, "Oh, you'll be fine." And I wasn't. That was a disaster. I couldn't remember any of my lines. I wrote them on my hand, and I'd walk on stage like going, "Aha!" And the thing was, it was set in the 18th century. It was about this theatre company who were doing Sheridan's The Rivals. So I had to learn a lot of Sheridan's The Rivals. So yeah, and I've done things that have been disasters. I've walked into rooms and gone, whoa, you know, when people aren't expecting you. You know, I've done a bit of work in prisons, and I take my hat off to people who work in prisons. I've done a bit, and it's not great fun. Although I've done work with, you know, adults with mental health issues and people in bail hostels and homeless people. And that's always what they say, challenging, but always rewarding. So yeah, you have to accept when you start that something's going to be an absolute and utter disaster. But I always think, this is my advice, think in geological time. So at the moment it happens, you think, God, this is the worst moment of my life. But then you think, well, in 100,000 years, nobody will know. And in fact, when you walk out the room, the people on the bus, they don't know, you know, unless you tell them.
You didn't enjoy the performances in prisons. Would that be the build-up to it and everything you have to go through?
It was lots of things. It was partly the kind of the oppressive nature of them, and things have changed. You know, when I did a few way back in the 80s, it felt like the Home Office were more interested in getting people doing education. It feels less so now, and you'd have to go in and go through lots of locked doors to get to a room with some people in. And the inmates themselves were always fine. It was just the atmosphere around the whole thing that I find quite oppressive. And it didn't seem to me to lead to great work. On the other hand, you get writers who are addicted to working in prisons. A guy I know called Kev Fegan, who was a poet and playwright from Nottinghamshire. He loves it. You know, he spent lots of his life going into prisons. And they do fantastic work. But I think in the end, it's probably not for me. The scariest one I ever did, I was scared at Wakefield High Security Prison, where there were lots of people in there who were well known because they'd been on television for doing terrible crimes. And that was an odd thing to walk into this room and you think, oh, I've seen you on the telly. You know, and the guy in charge went, I'll leave you. If they get lively, just bang on the door. I said, oh, thank you very much. And then on the wall, behind a bit of glass, there was a load of woodworking tools. So I thought, that's interesting. I'm in a room with people who've murdered people, and there's no warden, and there's some woodworking tools behind very thin glass. It was all right. It was fine, but just I didn't enjoy it. And afterwards I thought, if I don't enjoy it, then I'll not do any more. But I work in challenging situations, but that was one that defeated me. And I think it was just the atmosphere of it. Although, to be honest with you, the last one I did enjoy. Wakefield Women's Prison. Just a nice atmosphere, people laughing, people having a good time. Somebody saying, I know you. And apparently this woman turned out to live near my daughter. And I did another one. And I'm laughing now, but it was one in one of the prisons in Doncaster. And this fella came up to me, who sits near me at the football at Barnsley. And he went, it's all right, Ian. This is in the prison. It's all right, Ian. I haven't done anything wrong. I went, oh, yeah. This prison's full of innocent men. Dear me.
I used to live down the road from the high security prison in Wakefield.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for very long. And
it's an odd oppressive looking place, isn't it? Whenever I get on the train at Westgate Station, I look across to the thing and it's got a clock. And you think, gosh, those people I talked to 20 years ago, maybe still in there. You know, it has this big kind of presence at that end of Wakefield. Yeah, it's an odd place. Some of them are all right, but that I did find that one quite scary. Huh.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Yorkshire.
All right.
Because, well, not necessarily Yorkshire, but the use of dialect in poetry, I'm interested in.
Right.
Recently, I've been doing some research into Shropshire, where I live and where I was born, and where I'll die probably. You know, I'm a Salopian to the end.
Right, too.
And the Shropshire accent is a weird thing because it doesn't really exist. Apparently, 150 years ago to perhaps 100 years ago, it sounded a lot like the West Country accent. But it's disappeared over the last 100 years, as it seems like three things have happened. One, we have the influence of North Wales, and then the influence of the Black Country. And I think also, because some people have commented that the Shropshire accent has something of received pronunciation to it, even among people who aren't privately educated, like me. Some people say that I have a bit of that, but I'm not from a private school.
So there must still be a number of different Shropshire accents, mustn't there? They must still be amongst the older people. They will be able to spot different accents from different parts of Shropshire. So maybe a Shrewsbury accent will be different to a more rural accent. So they must still be there. And there must be Shropshire dialect poets, maybe from the 18th or 19th century. Have you managed to find any?
I haven't, but I imagine you're right, that there would.
There must be some, because my producer at The Verb is from Hertfordshire, and she's interested in that similar kind of thing, that the Hertfordshire accent was swallowed up when parts of Hertfordshire became just really bits of outer London. But she's spoken to older people from Hertfordshire who still have this Hertfordshire accent, or a number of different Hertfordshire accents, as we know. So like a Watford accent will be different to a Hatfield accent. But so I think there are examples like that. But I think it would be good to try and find some 19th century Shropshire dialect poets and just see what they were writing about. I'm very interested in the modern use of dialect in poetry. Anne Robinson writes fantastic poetry in Cockney, and she's tackled that problem that we all have when we try and write dialect poetry, which is the punctuation. What do you do? You know, if I'm writing, I'm going to go to shop. If you wrote that down, people write down, I'm going to go to apostrophe T apostrophe shop, and that second T doesn't exist. I'm going to shop. It's like it's a glottal stop, or it's a pause, or it's a nanosecond of breath. And what she does is she experimented with using the forward slash line to represent that, and now she does I forgot the name of it, but it's like a vertical version of the forward slash, and that represents got to go, and it's that. She's very interesting, and there are other modern dialect poets. What's her name? Can't remember, but there's a modern dialect poet who is working in the Nottinghamshire dialect, which is a fascinating dialect because it's got the wide A. I often talk about the fact they call their house their ass, which is true, you know. So, and she represents that with a line under the A. And so I am very interested in dialect poetry. I've written quite a lot of it myself, and come across all that problem of where do you put the punctuation? How do you imagine somebody who is not me reading it? How do you codify all the different dialects that are in Yorkshire? There are so many, and there's going to be the same in Shropshire. There are so, I mean, Barnsley, so different to Wakefield. Wakefield's falling over into Leeds a bit, falling that way a bit towards that end of North Yorkshire. Hull, that wonderful accent. I've got all the Stern Roses albums. This Skern, tastes like a stern. What beautiful thing. Near me, I mean, I'm in Darfield near Barnsley. If I go 12 miles down the road towards Sheffield, the accent changes completely. You know, from the soft the that I would say to the hard the, and the a widens. Not in. What are doing? This, and I don't know. We should celebrate it as writers. The trouble is, some accents seem to be able to hold seriousness, whereas some end up being kind of just vehicles for comedy. So that's what's happened in a way to the Yorkshire accent. The Yorkshire accent has been seen as a vehicle for comedy. Same with the Lancashire accent. They've been seen as things. There's a fantastic Lancashire poet, older fella called Sid Calderbank, who writes these amazing, touching Lancashire dialect poems. And he said that sometimes when he reads them out, people laugh because it's in Lancashire. They assume you're going to laugh. It's that great line of Tony Harrison's that we, i.e. me, you, the people who speak and try and write in dialect, are the ones that Shakespeare gives the comedy parts to. You know, somehow there's this idea that dialect can't be deep and loving and intellectual. And I think it can, whereas things like Scots gets away with it. Doric gets away with it. That's just an accent. Some fantastic poets writing in Shetlandic. Robert Allen Jameson, who writes in Shetlandic. And that accent seems to have weight, whereas, I don't know, the Yorkshire accent seems to be a kind of clownish accent. And I've tried to write stuff that was not funny in Yorkshire dialect. But then again, I went to talk to the Yorkshire Dialect Society. They were interesting. Very serious people, very serious. And one of them got dressed up as a kind of cod Yorkshireman. He had a flat cap and he had a sort of muffler. And I thought it was a comedy thing, but that's his way of representing the Yorkshireman as he sits there. And he wrote these very sensitive poems in Yorkshire dialect. The weird thing was, the man in charge was a Brummie. I found that a bit weird, to be honest with you, but he just loved accents. And he was called Clive Upton, and he was a linguist. So I think if I was you, I would try and find the Shropshire accent, try and find where it is, because it's somewhere. I went on honeymoon in Shropshire to Aston-on-Clun.
Oh, I know.
1979, Aston-on-Clun. And of course, the Aston-on-Clun accent will be different to the Ludlow accent, won't it? That's the thing. It's these, I talk about it a lot, what linguists call the isogloss, where language changes in this small geographical space. It's just an amazing thing. There's a word, I write a column every week for the Yorkshire Post, and the word, it's not always about language, but I was talking to a fella recently, and he said a word that I've only ever heard round here. He went, yeah, ate him, bushta. And he went, bushta. And then this other chap who's just been doing a bit of double glazing across the road, he went, bushta. Bushta, what a word. And I tried it out on a few people. They'd never heard it. But then I've heard bushta. I looked it up. It doesn't mean what they say to me. It doesn't mean what these people are using it. They're using it as a kind of onomatopoeic thing about a bushta. So, I don't know. There are very tiny words. I heard one in Doncaster. What was it? I was in a taxi and the fellow went, look at that, you can't shift for grods. I went, what's a grod? Grod. And
that's a great word.
It's a great word. And it's an old Doncaster dialect word for a push bike that's not very well maintained. There's always people going past on old grods. I said, look, I live 8 miles from here. I've never heard grod. And that's what we should celebrate, I think, these words that are just little islands on their own, that, as we know, if you stop using them, then some part of the universe falls away, doesn't it? These words, it's like when you read poetry in an endangered language. You think, well, when that language is gone, we're going to lose some rooms in the house of our mind. And it's the same thing with dialect. So I'm going to use bushta more and more. And so you should do the same, Anthony, with lost and forgotten Shropshire word. There must be some.
Well, I've looked some up, and the trouble I found is that I don't recognise most of them, so I don't know how widespread they are. But also,
they're obsolete then? Are they obsolete? Are they gone? Or are they still in use?
Or maybe they just exist in one village somewhere in Shropshire.
Yeah.
And then there are others that are on these lists that I assume are more widespread. You know, that I had heard of them. Things like calling a friend, my mucker. I think that's quite. That's UK wide, surely.
Mucker is a kind of industrial word, I think. So you would get mucker. You get mucker around here. One test is always what I call a bread cake. What do they call a bread cake in Shropshire? What people might call a cob or a bun in other parts of Britain. If you went to the shop,
bun, I think.
A bun, right? So bun is kind of West Midlands-ish. It's such a great thing. The bun, the cob, the bap, the batch, the muffin. Where was I the other day? I was in Saddleworth, which is actually in Yorkshire, but is almost Lancashire. I went in a shop for a ham sandwich, and they gave me a ham muffin. And in my head, a muffin is a chocolate thing. They gave me this ham muffin. Amazing. And I was only about 30 miles from here, where they all spoke in a Lancashire, like that. But they actually, apparently in 1977, had a referendum to stay in Yorkshire. Good for them. But the ham muffins, I don't know. I think we should explore that more as poets. We should use dialect more. I'd like to see more of it. But it's not happening at the moment. I think it might. In the same way that, some of the minority languages have been championed, like Welsh, Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, Manx, Cornish, some tiny ones on the Channel Islands, Guernsey French. There's some people trying to get more Guernsey French. And it just widens out the franchise, doesn't it? So we should do more of that. You could start by doing some of your wonderful palindromes in Shropshire dialect. That's a challenge, I think. Have I got that? Maybe not.
The thing is, that could be cheating, because there'd be no definite way of how the words should be spelled.
Well, that's true.
That's true. Although, that makes it easier. So perhaps. I've remembered another word. This was. I'll ask you about this. Pither or pither.
Pither. No, I don't know that one at all. What's that?
Oh, so that might just be Shropshire.
Might be.
It's so pithering around would be to mess around.
Wow, that is a definite. Well, I've never heard it before, so that could be a real proper Shropshire word, to pither around. That is fantastic. So then, what do? We put it in our poems, so it's there. So we help it to live. We say it, without any irony. I'm just pithering about, and eventually, words like that will come back stronger, I guess. Have you heard people saying it then? Have you heard anybody in Shropshire saying it, or is it obsolete?
Yeah, I've used it.
All right. So
without realizing that it's so specific to the region.
That's what happens, isn't it? I end up using words that I think are just words, and it turns out they're dialect words, and then it turns out they're endangered dialect words, and I've got no idea because I'm just saying them. But pithered, what a great word. Definitely, I'm going to use that, pithered. So just pithering about, because it sounds like, it's almost like a euphemism for pissing about, isn't it? It sounds a bit like that, doesn't it? So because that hard p gives it, he's pithering about, he's pithering about it. It works really well. Because I heard one that didn't work so well. A woman I know called Bernie, who is a sculptor originally from Ireland, but then living in Nottinghamshire. Her way of describing the same thing as pithering would be orming. I'm just orming about. So that bit doesn't describe, I don't think, as well as pithering. I think orming suggests a kind of lackadaisical, like you're laying on a chaise long, whereas pithering suggests active messing about, knocking things off shelves. Definite great word. Great word.
Yes.
And if you use it, then it exists. Yeah.
And there is that temptation to use it more once you know it's rare. But because you want to.
That's like me with bush dar. I'm going to use bush dar more, because once you know it's rare, it is a bit like being a train spotter or a bird watcher, isn't it? When you think, I've seen that rare bird, I've spotted that rare train, I'm using this rare word, so it's not going to die. I did actually, years ago when I was a young boy, invent a word. The word was bully, and it was like a good thing. A good thing was a bully thing. And I wrote to the local paper, pretending that my granddad said it, and I made it up. And I went, my granddad says the word bully. What does it mean? I then got two of my mates to write in the week after, and I wrote in again using a typewriter, and then they got two genuine answers. And I kept this going for about 3 weeks. And then I wrote this shamefaced letter to the editor saying, I admit it was me. I was only 12. I admit it was me being silly. And he got really angry. And he wrote this letter to my parents saying, the police will be involved. Because he's trying to diss it.
The stress you cause local linguists.
Oh, that's it. Oh, dear. Oh. I don't know.
On a related note, we have to talk about wordplay, of course. On Twitter, you are the master of puns. I think it's fair to say.
To me, the master is Moose Alain, the wonderful Moose Alain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you ought to get him on the podcast. He's a very good talker on. And he used this amazing phrase when he was talking about how he writes. And he says, I pound my brain. And he pounds his brain to try and find these puns and wordplay. Or somebody like Tim Vine will sit in a room with a dictionary and just find a word in a dictionary and then see what happens around that. With me, they just pop into my head unexpectedly. I don't know why. I think it's because maybe like you know, if you're working on a palindrome or an anagram piece, then I don't know if you find this, but then suddenly a thing will pop into your head that's got nothing to do with the thing that your brain is you're pounding your brain about. Yeah, I mean, I've always loved wordplay. I love wordplay to death. I think wordplay is just great. It's liberating. I was going to say democratic, and it's not that. I don't mean that everybody can make them up, but everybody can enjoy them. And it's not like it's not an undemocratic form in that way. And when you think of the trouble is, you think of ones that you think are great, you think are fantastic, and nobody. You put them on Twitter, and it kind of dies a death. So I did one.
Well, that's just Twitter. that sums Twitter up.
That's true. It does. I did one. That fantastic Basil Fawlty phrase where he goes pretentious moi, and I just put unpretentious me. And I thought that was so clever, but then nothing. Silence. One of my favourite ones that I made up, and it just popped into my head again, was I was thinking about that word. I was thinking about anagrams actually, and I was thinking about horse and shore, and they're both anagrams, simple anagrams. I just put a shore my anagram for a horse, and that still makes me laugh.
Great.
I don't know what it is, but wordplay just gives you a little joy. And I can remember specifically when I started doing wordplay, because it was, believe it or not, I was a kind of a shy child, and we went on a church trip on a bus in the kind of early 70s down to London. And I was a shy child sitting there, and there was all these kind of not so shy kids around me. And I thought, I wonder I can not be so shy. I could probably make them laugh. And I thought, I can't do anything physical. I couldn't be a clown, but I thought I could just. So I had a bottle of pop, and I said something like, yes, look at this ancient Ming vase from the Lemonade dynasty or something like that. And they laughed. I thought, what have I done there? What have I done? I've made a thing. It wasn't a pun. It was a kind of play on words. And then I remember that I was reading people like Spike Milligan and people like that. And a lot of these, as I got a bit older, a lot of these kind of writers who wrote for the New Yorker, people like S.J. Perelman and Robert Benchley and Alexander Woolcott, who always did quite a lot of puns in their work. And then I started to think, well, I can do that. But then, to me, Twitter is the best possible outlet for them. Here it goes. You know, people like Moose Alain, one of my favourite ones of his. I've made a model of a mountain. Is it to scale? No, just to look at. I think, gosh, that is so clever. And that's why I like it. But yeah, wordplay is a great thing. And I always encourage people to have a go at doing it and to do as much of it as they can. Some people can't do it and don't get it. The weird thing is, I don't know about you, Anthony, but when people say to me, oh, you must be good at cryptic crosswords. No. I have this thing when I go, right, this year I'm going to do cryptic crosswords. My wife, she groans at the thought. I got a book, How to Do Cryptic Crosswords. And I sit there and look at the Guardian cryptic crosswords, and I go, I've got no idea what that means. You think I would, with the kind of brain I've got that can think of gags and puns and wordplay and anagrams a bit. Are you any good at them? You think you would be?
I'm not. No, I can do the anagrams, but that's it. And anything else related to it, I struggle. I mean, perhaps it's a matter of practice, because I haven't really ever got obsessed with it the way a lot of people, I know a lot of people who are
And I
really
keep
obsessed
thinking,
with it.
would it help my writing? You know, because every day me and my wife to the Guardian, quick crossword, but then I kind of my eyes go towards the other one. I keep thinking maybe next year, 2022 will be the year of the cryptic crossword for me. Yeah, that's why I like wordplay, and I think wordplay is associated with rhyme. I love rhyme. As a young man, I didn't. As an old man, I realised that rhyme is such a fantastic thing. I like rhyme. I like half rhyme. I like assonance. I like acrostics. And I just think, as you know more than me, they're straitjackets, but they're also kind of weirdly liberating straitjackets that you can dance in, aren't they? They're sort of, they hold you down. And I think if I'm working with a group of people who are a bit nervous about writing things, I'll say, let's write a sonnet. Let's write a sonnet together. I'll explain to them what a Shakespearean sonnet is, and we'll just write them. And they then have that fantastic sense of achievement when they've written one. Sonnets, limericks, haiku, pantoums, sestina, any of them forms. You know, they are a form of wordplay, and I find they're useful in workshops because you can produce something interesting. This fella, Ken Brooks, who may well be listening to this, who was a lovely chap who lives in Darfield. During the lockdown, I was Barnsley Council's Poet in Lockdown, which led to some fantastic heckling from cars when people shouted, "You should be locked up, not locked down." And I had to write 2 sonnets a week for this thing. So then Ken started writing sonnets, and he's like, he's obsessed. It's true to say, with sonnets, and he's written books of sonnets, and to me, it's like a way of, I don't know, organising your thinking. So yes, wordplay is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And who's the other person on Twitter? What's his name? Oh, I can't remember. There's somebody else on Twitter who's very good at puns. Glennie Rodge is good at puns, and I've forgotten his name now. But there are lots of people on Twitter, as you know, who are very good at puns. And I do enjoy doing them. As you know, Twitter, I like it. You know, I get up in the morning, I have to do an early morning tweet. Then I go for my early morning stroll and tweet about my stroll. Then during the day, I just tweet about things that are happening. Then at night, I've started doing a kind of "I'm going to bed now" tweet. And I think it helps my brain. You know, when I get up in the morning, I'm at my best at 5 a.m. I really am. I feel so alert. I feel so alive.
It's the opposite of
And
me.
then, well, that's it. I mean, we're all different, aren't we? Larks and owls. I mean, this is late night cabaret for me, I've got to tell you. And I get up, I feel so like physically and mentally alive. That's when I go on my stroll and I write stuff. It's a long answer to a short question, but I think Twitter is a very good medium for wordplay of the punning kind, definitely.
Yeah, your use of Twitter is remarkable. I feel guilty that I'm taking you away from Twitter doing this interview.
Not at all. No. To be honest with you, mornings are best for me on Twitter, you know, and then towards the evening, I just start to fade away a bit. And I like to retweet. I think there's lots of endeavour at me on Twitter, but then you have to go, it's not enough to retweet it. You know, you can't just retweet something saying this is a terrible thing or this is a good thing. You've got to actually either put your hand in your pocket or go out there and do something. So, I'm busy. But during the lockdown, when you couldn't go anywhere, Twitter was useful, I've got to say. And I'm lucky in that I've had very little trolling, in fact, hardly any. People just seem to enjoy it. Just they know that I'm no threat. I think I'm just somebody who's having a laugh with Twitter, which is a good thing. And in fact, one of my producers at The Verb introduced me to it, Jessica Treen. She said, "You ought to go on Twitter, Ian, maybe once a week." So I went on Twitter to advertise The Verb, you know, because The Verb's got a Twitter thing. That's my Radio 3 show, The Verb. And I went on it. I thought, oh, this is it. And then I was just tweeting into the void. And then somebody, a writer called David Belbin from Nottingham, said, "You realise you can have responses?" I went, "What? Never knew that." And in fact, the first thing I did was a gag. One of the first things was, what was it? "I'm addicted to that philosophy program set in a hospital, Causality," which I thought was so funny. You know, that went out into the void. But you do find, you'll find this on Twitter. You're followed by a few people who are kind of genuinely interacting, and thousands of robots, cafes, Russian women who want to marry you, inanimate objects, and they go up and down, you know, and some go and come. And the other day I got followed by a cafe in Brooklyn. I mean, I've been to Brooklyn, but not for a long time. I'm unlikely to go to this cafe in Brooklyn. And it wasn't like it was a cafe in Brooklyn that was using poems. It was just like their menu and stuff. And you think, who knows why they pop up? I do sometimes get people who think I'm Ian McKellen. And
I've seen this, yeah.
Oh, and you see, I always try to be polite, as you know. But one fella said, "I'm looking forward to your gig in Exeter." And I thought, and then you worry, you go, "I'm meant to be in Exeter tomorrow." We've all done that. And I said, "I think you've got the wrong." And then they're embarrassed. I always try to. I like to let people down gently. You know, I don't want to. I never like to be saying I'm not him. You know, I always like to, and that's why I always try and answer people when they tweet, even if it's just a thumbs up or an eye, just to let them know that they're not just tweeting into the void. Is my view.
It's a strange place, Twitter. I really do have a love-hate relationship.
Yes, I know, but I do love your anagrams and your palindromes. Just they fit Twitter beautifully. I think the shorter ones, obviously, but when you put them on a page as well, and people love them, don't they? People do like your anagrams and things on Twitter. They go down very well, which is good, and it leads people to the press, doesn't it? And it leads people to wanting to have a go themselves, and again, a liberating thing, I think. I love the language of your anagrams and palindromes, because the language is so interesting, isn't it? Because you know this far much more than me. Certain words you can't use, so certain rhythms of speech you end up not being able to use. So it always feels like a really interesting, heightened language to me. That's what is exciting about it. It works beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, especially palindromes. You can't really use the definite article, which is such a huge part of language, and THE reverse. You can't really find a way to fit that in.
What was that one? That was it? Idris Elba. The Idris Elba one was one of your greatest hits, wasn't it?
That is my if in terms of Twitter, yeah, that's my greatest hit by some way.
Yeah, because some big people retweeted it, didn't they?
Yeah, J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, that was it. Gosh, she's got 1 million followers.
Well, I remember my phone exploding. My phone actually died because I kept refreshing Twitter and all the likes were coming in, and it was too much for it.
And I always see it as, you know, like they're an audience, and it's like you've published a little poem in a magazine, and 100 people might read it, but there's a load of people reading it, and that's got to be a good thing, I think. And especially if it, as I always hope it will, encourages them to have a go. I've always seen it as an encouraging thing. So, like in the morning, you'll see that quite a few people are doing little morning things because I do. You know, that's nice as well. I tell you, the other thing that's weird is when you meet somebody who you follow on Twitter who you don't know any otherwise. You know, so I was on a train once and I was tweeting about something, and a woman said, "I think I'm on your train," and she came down and said hello, and it was odd. You think, oh, they're real, these followers. And then I did this other thing once. I was on a train going down to London, and this fella, 3 seats in front of me, had this biggest bag of crisps you've ever seen. And he loved these crisps. He's eating these crisps. And he got to the end of the bag, and he's like that. He's bashing the thing. And so I just tweeted a thing about this fella really loves this crisps. And he tweeted back. He said, "Yeah, I like crisps." He'd recognised me. He must have seen me on the telly or something. And he wasn't nasty, neither was I. But I thought, oh, you've got to always remember that the people that you observe and that you're listening on are real people. You know, that's why I never try and say anything or retweet anything untoward that somebody has said, because you know that they are real people.
I want to go back to what you said about writing puns and what was the phrase? Pounding
your head, yeah.
Yeah, which
that was Moose at LA.
Yeah, because writing palindromes, I don't do that. It's more that I've trained myself to unconsciously look out for these things. So I'm always looking at words backwards, and then there's a seed of inspiration, and it just pops into my head. Oh, I can use this in the palindrome. And if I find a word I haven't used in the palindrome before, which I can tell is usable, then that's when I go for it.
And is that a version of you pounding your head then, or it's just it sounds more relaxing than that?
Yeah, it's just. I don't consciously pound my head. I've trained myself to do it subconsciously, and then once I've got the inspiration, I have fun with it. But I don't write many puns, and it's something I think I would like to do. if only because I think if you go through life looking for puns, you're probably happier than someone who doesn't.
Well, I think the way to do it is maybe the Tim Vine way, which is to just get a dictionary and look in the dictionary and see a word, wigwam, and then just try and think of a pun around that. I mean, years and years ago, I used to have to write jokes for comedians, and that was a funny thing. It wasn't, sometimes it wasn't funny. So the producer would ring up and say, this was for the Grumbleweeds years and years ago, and the producer would ring up and say, right, I want 10. I wouldn't say he was thin, but gags by 2:30. And you'd ring him up, and you'd have to ring him up and read the gags down the phone, and he wouldn't laugh once. And he'd go, I like number 6, but could you make it funnier? And that was such great training, because that's just you going, I wouldn't say it was thin, but I can't think of any of the gags now. And the other thing this is years and years ago, I used to send off, there used to be a program called Week Ending on Radio 4, and they always wanted jokes about the news. But this is the days, weirdly, before the internet, before faxes. So you just have to, me and my mate would type these gags out on a Tuesday, post them to these people, and then they might get on. So things like, what was it? Following the death of Walter Gabriel on the Archers, his part will be played by a squeaky door, because he had a voice like a squeaky door. So we sent that off, and you get £2. And then we thought we got our big break, because they wrote to us and said, would you like to come to the writers' meeting? I said, yes, we would. We went down, we were late, and the writers' meeting had finished. And we got these little pathetic jokes we got like on bits of paper. And we said, oh, we're sorry we're late, we've got these jokes. And they went, take them to that man eating the sausage roll. There's a man eating a sausage roll, and we thought it was going to be really glamorous. And this fellow's got sausage roll over his face. We gave him these gags. And we thought, we've arrived. And then they used 2 of the gags the week after, but forgot to put our names on. So yes, I would say with puns, it's just be mechanical about it in a way, and then still, things will occur to you. So sometimes they do just pop into your head. One popped into my head. Did you hear about the hippie who was a messy eater? He didn't know which side his beard was buttered. That's interesting, because like bread and beard, that's just a wordplay thing. I did a gig once, me and my mate Luke, in Otley Courthouse. The whole way through the gig, this fellow was enjoying it, but he wasn't laughing. He was like nodding along. That gag about the beard, he laughed his head off. Nobody else laughed. He just fell about. I met him about a year later. He went, that gag, that was great. And he was still talking about it. So I would recommend, if you want to write puns, going about it mechanically. I was looking at a word, thinking of what might be around that word, thinking how that word might look in a different context. And then eventually, a bit like with your palindrome and anagram searching, it becomes almost automatic. So I would recommend it, definitely. Because in the end, nothing can go wrong in a way. You could write a bad pun. The world doesn't end.
We've all done it.
Put a bad pun on Twitter. Right, don't matter. That's think of it in geological time again. I wrote a bad pun once. When? 2021. Well, it's all right. But they do fill you with joy. It's true. They do fill you with joy. They do.
It's great to hear your enthusiasm for this, but you seem enthusiastic about everything, and that's also great. I mean, you've been a huge supporter of my poetry, and so thank you for that, and also for Penteract Press, and also for plenty of other poets and plenty of other presses. And you seem to have a really good, well-rounded appreciation of the various types of poetry, from very conventional poetry through to extremely experimental poetry. Is this a new thing for you, or have you always been?
No, it's always been the case. I've always liked a wide range of things. I'm going to be writing the foreword for the collected poems of Peter Finch. And Peter Finch is this Anglo-Welsh experimental poet from Cardiff. But he's like me, straddles both worlds, because he's like me. He likes experimental poetry, but also he likes to work in the community with people who would run a mile if they saw an experimental poem. They wouldn't run a mile, but they wouldn't enjoy it. They would say this isn't poetry. So when I do my writing workshops on a Tuesday with adults who've got mental health issues and often just feeling a bit down, you know, I probably won't show them an experimental poem because they would feel rejected by it. So yeah, I've always had that wide taste, and then pretty down to lots of things. Peter Finch, the reason I talked about him was that when I was a young man, he edited a magazine called Second Eon, which came out of Cardiff, and it was just full of experimental poems, non-experimental poems, observational poems, performance-y type poems. And I thought, oh, they're all valid, they're all exciting. So yeah, I've always had a wide Catholic taste. Again, it goes back to what we talked about right at the start, I think, about when I was at school. You know, I was encouraged to say that everybody can do this and that there's not just one way of doing it. So yeah, so for example, I'll show you what I'm reading at the moment. I've just got I'm a big fan of Ian Sinclair, so I've just been sent. I bought this from a press called Face Press. I love Ian Sinclair. He's great. On the other hand, I've just been reading. Where's he gone? This fella, Alan Gillis, who is a fairly conventional, if you like, image-based Northern Irish poet. I'm a big fan of J.H. Prynne. I love J.H. Prynne. I can't fathom J.H. Prynne at all, but I do like his work. So I also put it down to the fact that when I was younger, I liked listening to Radio 1 people like John Peel, who would play a massive range of stuff. And I've always thought the more eclectic your listening and reading habits are, I don't know, the more rounded a human being you can be. And being enthusiastic is one of my few talents, to be honest with you, because I am enthusiastic, and it's genuine enthusiasm. You know, I could be a good enthusiast in residence because I'm genuinely excited when people write poems, and I'm excited by what they write. And I think enthusiasm can go a long way as well. You know, I think if it's genuine enthusiasm and not forced, then it can enthuse the enthusee, if you like. You know, so people come to writing workshops and they always preface it with, oh, this isn't very good. And I'll read it and I'll pick out specific things. Go, oh, that is good. That's good. Why not try that? But if you're enthusiastic about it, occasionally I think I'm like that episode of Friends. Was it not Monica? One of them had a really enthusiastic boyfriend. I think I'm a bit like that sometimes. I'm like a bit Panglossian, as they say. You know, but then again,
that was the Alec Baldwin.
Alec Baldwin, that was him, and
yeah.
Was he Phoebe's boyfriend, wasn't it? And he was. I thought, God, I'm not like him, am I? But I think I am. You know, it was just everything was. Yeah, I am. I think being enthusiastic and encouraging people, because I was encouraged as a young man. My teachers encouraged me. My parents encouraged me. My wife encouraged me. My teachers encouraged me. Pete Morgan, other poets, always encouraged me. I said, look, you can do this. You can do this. And there's nothing worse than people being discouraged. I work a lot with people who think they can't write, people who think they can't sing, people who think they can't move. And you just have to say, you can actually. You can. I always said to them, look, nobody's going to come and tell you off in this room that we're in. You know, and they eventually, sometimes nothing happens, but they sometimes come out with poems that are, in my view, good. There was a thing on Twitter the other day when somebody had very nastily, I thought, taken the mickey out of somebody who'd written a poem about a kind of remembrance poem that was in a local paper. And I thought, so I just put, it's easy to sneer, but I like this poem, you know. That doesn't stop me liking J.H. Prynne and Kurt Schwitters. You know, you still like him. So yes, I do try and be enthusiastic. Well, not I don't try and be, I am enthusiastic, which is why people are always giving me poems, which is great. You know, people put poems to the letterbox. I get books of poems. Today, how many have I had today? 3. What have I had today? Three books. People send me books. And I always said to them, look, with the best will in the world, I have a load of reading to do for the verb. I've got to read things. I might not get around to it for a bit. The best one I ever had was a chap came and knocked on the door. And he went, Ian McMillan. I went, yes. He said, my dad translates Greek dramas into Yorkshire dialect. I said, oh, great. He said, can I show him you? I said, yeah. I said, bring him here. Get him here. He says he's in car. He can't get up because he's bent over like a question mark, he said. I thought, what a great phrase. I said, well, I'll have a look at him. So he goes down, he bangs on the roof of the car. He goes, Dad, he'll see him. So then this fellow, he couldn't get out of the car. But he wound the window down, held this carrier bag out with these Greek dramas. And then he said, I said, well, with the best will in the world, I am Barnsley's busiest man. I might take a while to get back to you. Just take him, kid. Have him for as long as you want. And you do get that sometimes. People actually genuinely don't want a react or don't want criticism. They just want somebody to have read it. You know, yeah. They just want you to see it, and I've still got them. I mean, they've been here for years. I occasionally look at them, but I bumped into them and said, "No, keep them." You know, and they just want somebody to read them and go, "That's good. That is good," and they'll remember that. I remember Pete Morgan encouraging me in 1976. I remember the exact words. "You are a lively surrealist," he said. Wow, great. You know, nobody said anything like that to me before. Well, the teachers had, you know, the poets saying it to you. So yes, I think enthusiasm is always good, always good.
Yeah, well,
these are great questions.
I admire it.
These are good. Well, I think if you force it, it's not good. But if it's genuine, then it's all right. But yeah, there's nothing worse than forced enthusiasm.
Yeah. So I naturally go from pessimist to optimist about every 10 minutes. I'm a yo-yoer.
Well, I mean, the other exciting thing, isn't it, that we're all different. If everybody was like me, goodness gracious. You know, when I've done a gig or something, people said to me, "I like this at home." You go, no. You know, the performer that you see is a persona. The enthusiast is genuine, but the performer that you see, God. I said, "No, I just lay on the settee in a vest watching Diagnosis Murder." Oh dear.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with you that I can't understand why some people be so negative about other people's work, which you do see quite a lot, especially on back to Twitter. You see quite a lot there.
You do.
People just attacking
I don't know
each
why.
other.
Yeah. It's not attacking because I don't know why. I really don't know why. And there's no point. I mean, there'd be no point me asking them in a way. You know, why are you being negative? They'll say, "Well, this because this work's rubbish." And I always say, "Well, you know, who says it's rubbish?" You know, I always find that interesting. The thing I do get in trouble with is I'm quite free with grammar and punctuation. That gets them going. I love it when you know, apostrophes. I would rather die than put apostrophe in the wrong place. No, you wouldn't. You know, apostrophes are dying out anyway, according to Michael Rosen. I believe him in a few years. But people do get genuinely cross when the apostrophe is in the wrong place. They get really annoyed. Me and my mate Luke sing a song called Apostrophe Amnesty Day. But I said, "Look, one day you put them where you like." And half the audience go, one too many for them.
There's so many times I've seen people complain about grammar and punctuation in comments that themselves have incorrect grammar and punctuation.
That's the thing. And yeah, and I always said to them, "Look, they're not rules, they're conventions." They say, "You've broken the rules of punctuation." They're conventions, they're not rules, you know. And you get some people then who would not dare come to a writing workshop because they're frightened that the grammar punctuation police will nab them. And that's the horrible thing about it, you know. They don't know where to put the apostrophe. Don't bother me at all. I'm interested in language change. You'll have noticed this on Twitter, that the word peep became the word peak. And now everybody spells sneak peek, P-E-A-K. I'm going to have a sneak peek. Whereas if you're going to spell peek, it's P-E-E-K. And I'm so interested in that. Even kind of big organizations are saying, "Let's have a sneak peek, P-E-A-K. And some people get cross about that. I don't, because you think, "Oh, that's exciting. There's language changing." You know, sneak peek, what is it? I mean, it's great, sneak peek. What do you follow Haggard Hawks on Twitter? And they every day they put very interesting old language words. And I find that liberating and interesting, you know, the way that they often demonstrate how language has changed over the years. Now, what we talked about earlier with dialect, how language has changed. So I just keep saying there's no rules, just conventions. Just have fun. Language is there for you to have fun with. You know, my grandkids will have fun with language. Babies have fun with language. Let's just have fun. You know, your anagrams and your palindromes are fun, aren't they? I know they give you a headache, but they are fun. They're such fun.
Yeah, play is very important. It's
it's
the main reason I do it. I think there's another reason I write poetry. I wonder if you feel the same way with things like sonnets and older forms. I really like the idea that when I write a sonnet, it's a sonnet that is in dialogue with every sonnet that's ever been written.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, that feeling of being part of a long tradition, but yet doing something that's never been done before with that form.
No, that is always good. I always find it quite moving. You know, that everybody, as you say, everybody who's ever written a sonnet standing behind you in a row, a long row stretching way back, and here you are doing another one. It's great. It's like I often say it's like making Yorkshire puddings. When I mix my Yorkshire puddings on a Sunday, everybody, my mother, my grandma, everybody who's ever made Yorkshire puddings are standing, and I'm just keeping that tradition going. And that's exactly what it is with sonnets, with any kind of old form, that you are plugging straight in to an endless tradition. And that's why I try and get people to write these forms. Sonnets in particular, people seem to love sonnets, particularly the Shakespearean sonnet, because you can give them rules. And at conventions, you can say, look, 10 syllables a line, rhyme it in this way. And people get into it, and you can write them in a group. I was walking around a little village in Yorkshire with a group that we were working together, and we wrote group sonnets. That was good. So yes, I think that's a very satisfying thing about writing in forms. The one form that I'm not that good at is sestinas. Have you tried writing them? I found them really hard, a sestina. Really.
Well, I have a palindromic sestina.
Of course you do. Yes.
I've only written 2 sestinas, actually. One's palindromic and the other has anagrammed lines. I think because I knew that just trying a sestina that is only a sestina without an additional constraint, I don't think I could do a good one, because it is such a laborious.
It isn't. And when they don't work well, they kind of clank a bit. The best sestinas are one where you sometimes, to start with, don't quite notice what it is. Then they work well. A lot of Americans love them. American creative writing courses, they often do sestinas. And it's a good exercise in that way. And that's what all these things are, aren't they? They're exercises for the brain, definitely. I like haiku when you do them nicely. I like them. I like the constraint of it. But like you, I mean, you're the king of constraints, but constraint is interesting, isn't it, in the kind of Ulipan way of trying to write something without any ease in it, or that kind of thing. That's always a fascinating task.
Well, okay, we've passed an hour now. A very quick hour, I've got to say.
Gosh, was that an hour? Goodness me.
Yeah.
Perhaps a few more minutes then, if that's all right. So I've got to go and enthuse. In fact, I'm going to go for my evening stroll.
So the last question, again, this is my standard last question, is what are you working on now? Which I imagine is a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on lots of things simultaneously. We've just got a big new town square in Barnsley. Wonderful town square. And we're having a visit from a giant puppet called Storm, which is a bit like Little Amal, you know, the refugee girl. This is one called Storm. And so it's Storm's first appearance in England. She'd been to Scotland before. So I was commissioned to write a 4-minute piece, and I'm going to introduce Storm from a grassy knoll in the middle of Barnsley. So this very specific brief, it's got to encourage everybody to go and look at Storm. It's got to include all these things that happen in that night, and it's got to have some call and response in it. So I'm working on that. So I've sent the first draft of that off. I'm also doing the opposite of that, which is I've been working with a neon artist called Patrick Murphy, and we've been writing 1-sentence things in neon. We did one in the middle of Barnsley. That went Barnsley's fierce. Was it Barnsley? Barnsley's fierce love holds you to its heart, holds you forever in its heart. So I'm writing one of them for Rotherham. So I've now got to think of some things for. I'm working on those 2 things, and I'm writing a lyrical history of this community arts place in Doncaster that I work called Darts, Doncaster Community Arts, with a musician. So those are 3 things. I'm working on this big piece where I'm going to be in dialogue with a giant puppet, and I'm working on these single line things with a neon artist, and I'm working with lyrical responses to the history of this community art place with a musician. So and I'm trying to do all 3 at once, partly because the deadline's knocking on your door, but also because it's interesting. And I've sent some of them off, and they quite like the puppet thing, but I need to do more of that. I'm having to whittle down the neon thing, and I've sent some of the other thing off. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm a busy boy, which is good. Good to be busy. Yeah. They tell me.
Well, thank you again so much for everything you do. And
well, thank you.
And thank you for being here. It's been really good to see you again.
It's great to see you. It was in Oswestry last time, wasn't it?
It was.
And the Wilfred Owen thing. Yeah.
When the world was very different. Yeah.
when was that? 2016, 17?
18.
Was it 18? No, it's not as far away as I thought. Oh, that's not so bad. That was a nice evening as well. Good. Oh, well, that's great. Thank you very much, Anthony. And I'll tweet that we just done it. I'll tweet it when it's on. And I'll keep tweeting.
Keep on tweeting. Yeah.
I will.